I came to my brother's engagement knowing I was not welcome, but I did not expect the night to turn into a quiet war where every smile hid a threat and every word carried a consequence. By the time the evening ended, one family would be exposed, another would be shaken, and a truth I had kept hidden for years would be forced into the open in front of everyone who believed I was nothing. The moment I stepped into the ballroom, I heard her voice before I saw her. Sloane Whitmore, my brother Garrett's fiancée, leaned toward her friends and spoke just loudly enough to be heard. She called me the country girl who ruined the look of the room. The women around her laughed without even turning to look at me, as if I were not worth the effort. Sloane did not face me either. To her, I was an embarrassment that had wandered in uninvited. I stood near the entrance for a moment, letting the noise settle around me. Glasses clinked, music played, and people admired decorations chosen to impress guests who already thought highly of themselves. No one greeted me. No one asked how I was. That was normal. In this family, I had learned early how to arrive quietly and take up as little space as possible. What none of them knew was that the building they were celebrating in belonged to me. The hotel, the staff, the room itself were all part of a life I had built far away from them. I had arrived wearing simple clothes, boots still dusty from the drive, looking exactly like the person they believed I was. I did that on purpose. Across the room, my mother stood beside Sloane's parents, smiling proudly, speaking as if this evening proved something important about our family. Garrett stayed close to Sloane, looking pleased and distracted, already acting like a man who believed his future was secure. I watched them all without moving, listening more than looking. I went to the bar and ordered a drink. The bartender recognized me but did not react. I had made sure my staff knew to treat me like any other guest. Staying invisible had always been useful. From the corner of the room, I saw Sloane glance at me again. This time, she smiled sharply, certain of her place and certain of mine. She had no idea that this engagement, this family, and this night rested on a lie she did not understand yet. And she had no idea that before the music stopped, that lie would begin to fall apart. I stayed where I was and watched the room instead of joining it. Years ago, I learned that people reveal more when they think you do not matter. Sloane moved through the guests like she owned them, touching arms, laughing at jokes she did not hear, collecting attention the way some people collect trophies. Her parents followed close behind, smiling too hard, watching every reaction like it was being scored. My mother eventually noticed me standing alone. She walked over with that tight smile she used when she wanted to appear polite without offering warmth. She looked me up and down and asked why I could not dress more appropriately for such an event. She reminded me that Sloane's family was refined and that first impressions mattered. I told her I had come straight from work and had no time to change. That was the truth, even if she misunderstood what my work actually was. She nodded, clearly unsatisfied, and told me to at least try not to embarrass anyone. Then she walked away, already done with the conversation. The exchange lasted less than a minute, but it carried the weight of years. Nothing had changed. I was still the problem that needed managing. Garrett came over next. He smiled, asked if I was enjoying myself, and spoke like we were distant relatives instead of siblings. He talked about how lucky he was, how perfect Sloane was, how everything felt right. He did not ask about my life, he never did. Before leaving, he mentioned something casually, like it meant nothing. He said our mother had given Sloane our grandmother's necklace as an engagement gift. I felt the air leave my chest. That necklace had been promised to me. Our grandmother had made that clear before she died. She had said it was meant for the one who would build something of her own. I had not fought for it then. I had learned not to. But seeing it hanging around Sloane's neck felt different. It felt final. I stepped away before Garrett noticed my reaction and walked toward the hallway to breathe. That was when I heard Sloane's father speaking on his phone. He did not see me. His voice was tight, rushed. He said they needed this wedding to happen. He said the Burns family had money and that everything would work out once the ceremony was done. I stopped walking. The words did not make sense. My family did not have money like that. Whatever he believed, it was wrong. He ended the call and returned to the party, his smile slipping back into place like nothing had happened. I stood there for a long moment, listening to the music from the ballroom, understanding that something beneath this celebration was unstable. The insult, the necklace, the phone call were not separate things. They were connected. I did not know how yet, but I knew one thing for certain. This engagement was not about love, and whatever they were planning depended on a lie that was already starting to crack. I went back into the ballroom with a different focus. I stopped watching my family and started watching Sloane's parents. Once I knew something was wrong, their behavior became easier to read. Her father checked his phone constantly, turning his body away from people when messages came in. Her mother kept adjusting her jewelry, touching it like she was afraid it might disappear if she stopped. Sloane stayed close to Garrett, but not in the way someone in love does. She watched the room more than she watched him. Every laugh felt timed. Every smile came with calculation. When someone important spoke to her, she leaned in. When someone unimportant approached, she moved on quickly. I found a quiet spot and stayed there listening. Guests talked freely around me, assuming I was harmless. A few mentioned how impressive Sloane's family was. Others joked about how lucky Garrett was to marry into money. Each comment tightened something in my chest. They all believed the same story, and none of them questioned it. Later, Sloane approached me. Her tone was polite, but her eyes were sharp. She said it was nice that I could attend and asked what I did for a living. I told her I worked in hospitality. She smiled in a way that made it clear she had already decided what that meant. She said it must be hard living in the shadow of a successful brother. I did not respond. She seemed disappointed that I did not defend myself. Before leaving, she leaned closer and told me that some people were meant to support others, not stand beside them. She said families worked better that way. Then she walked off, confident she had placed me exactly where I belonged. Not long after, I saw Garrett arguing quietly with his future in-laws near the edge of the room. The smiles were still there, but their voices were low and tense. When Garrett noticed me watching, he stopped speaking and waved it off like nothing was wrong. I stepped outside for air and checked my phone. A message from my bank confirmed a transfer I had scheduled earlier that day, the same kind I had been making every month for years. The kind that kept my parents' finances afloat without their knowledge. That was when it became clear. Sloane's family believed my brother was the source of that money. They believed he had resources they could use, and whatever situation they were in, this marriage was meant to solve it. I put my phone away and went back inside, fully aware now that this engagement was not just built on lies. It was built on a mistake. And once that mistake was exposed, everything would unravel. I did not confront anyone. I did not react. I stayed quiet and kept watching. The more I listened, the more certain I became that this night was being used for something far bigger than an engagement. Sloane's father stepped away again, this time near the service corridor. I moved closer without drawing attention. He lowered his voice, but not enough. He said they just needed to get through tonight. He said once the families were officially connected, things would calm down. He mentioned people asking questions and said they could not afford mistakes right now. When the call ended, he stood still for a second, like a man holding himself together by force. Back inside, Sloane found Garrett and took his arm, guiding him toward a group of guests. She laughed loudly, drawing attention, as if she needed witnesses. Garrett smiled, but his movements were stiff. He looked distracted, scanning the room between conversations. My mother passed by me without stopping. I heard her telling someone how generous her son was, how he always supported the family quietly, how proud she was of him. She spoke with certainty, like it was a fact she had always known. I understood then how the story had formed and how easily it had been believed. I moved toward the bar again. A staff member I trusted caught my eye. I asked him, quietly, if he had noticed anything unusual with the Whitmores earlier in the day. He hesitated, then said they had asked strange questions about contracts, ownership, and guest lists. Questions that had nothing to do with an engagement party. That was enough. This was not just a misunderstanding. This was planning. Sloane approached me again, this time without the smile. She told me Garrett had mentioned that I sometimes caused tension in the family. She said tonight was important and that she hoped I would not do anything to make things awkward. The message was clear. She wanted me controlled, silent, out of the way. I told her she did not need to worry. I said I was only there to observe. That seemed to irritate her more than any argument would have. She warned me that people who lived in the past usually stayed there. Then she walked away. I looked around the room once more. Every conversation, every movement, every forced laugh fit together now. They were not celebrating a future. They were buying time. And the closer the night moved toward its main moment, the more certain I became that when the truth surfaced, it would not surface quietly. I needed facts, not guesses. Suspicion alone was not enough, and if I was going to act, I had to be certain. I stepped away from the crowd and went toward the service area where one of the senior managers was overseeing the evening. I spoke to him briefly, asked for a quiet word, and requested background information on the Whitmore family. I did not explain why. I did not need to. He understood the tone in my voice. While he worked, I returned to the ballroom and kept my distance. Sloane had relaxed again, clearly convinced that whatever tension existed was under control. Her parents stayed close to influential guests, making promises that were vague but confident. I noticed how carefully they avoided details. Nothing they said could be verified. Everything was future tense. Garrett approached me once more. This time, he asked if something was wrong. He said Sloane seemed stressed and that her parents were acting strange. I told him I had noticed it too. I said he should trust that feeling instead of ignoring it. He hesitated, then said it was probably just wedding pressure. He walked away before I could say more. Minutes later, the manager returned. He did not speak at first. He handed me a folder and told me I should read it somewhere private. His expression told me enough before I even opened it. I stepped into a quiet hallway and scanned the pages. The names were there, but they did not line up the way they should have. Businesses connected to the Whitmores had closed suddenly in other states. Legal filings referenced investigations that were still ongoing. Properties listed as assets no longer existed or had been sold years ago. It was not sloppy. It was deliberate. This family was running out of time. As I read, a message appeared on my phone. It was from Garrett. He asked if we could talk later. He said something about Sloane's stories not matching up and that her parents avoided questions about their past. I stared at the message and did not respond. I already knew what he was starting to realize, and I knew that once this collapsed, it would collapse fast. I closed the folder and handed it back. I told the manager I might need access to certain systems later in the evening. He nodded without asking questions. I returned to the ballroom, fully aware now that the engagement was only a cover. The real event was still coming, and when it arrived, no one in that room would be able to pretend they did not see it. I stopped pretending I was just a guest. From that moment, every minute mattered. I stayed close enough to hear conversations without being noticed and far enough away to avoid being pulled into them. The Whitmores were tightening their circle now. They spoke less, moved together, and watched the exits more often than the dance floor. Sloane caught Garrett's arm again and pulled him aside. I could not hear the words, but I saw the change in his face. His smile faded. He asked questions. She answered quickly, too quickly, and redirected his attention back to the guests. When he looked uncertain, her hand tightened on his sleeve. That single movement told me more than any conversation could. My phone vibrated. The manager sent a short message confirming what I suspected. There was an active investigation connected to the Whitmore name, buried under different business titles and locations. Nothing had reached the public yet, but it was close. Very close. I watched Sloane's parents whisper urgently near the bar. Her father gestured toward Garrett, then toward my mother. Her mother shook her head, clearly frustrated. Whatever they expected from this family was not moving fast enough. Then I heard my mother again. She was speaking to a group of guests, repeating the same story about her son's success, how he had always taken care of things quietly. She said it with pride, not knowing how dangerous that story had become. I realized then that the Whitmores had not chosen Garrett by chance. They had chosen the version of him they were told about. Sloane found me a third time. This time, she did not bother with politeness. She asked why I was still there. She said this was not my world anymore, and that some people should know when to leave things alone. I told her I agreed. I said some things should never be touched unless you were ready for what happened next. She stared at me, searching for meaning, then laughed softly and walked away. She thought I was bluffing. I checked the time. The main toast was coming up soon. The moment they were waiting for. The moment they believed would lock everything in place. I stood still, listening to the music rise, the glasses being filled again, the room settling into expectation. They believed they were reaching safety. They were not. They were walking straight toward exposure, and they had no idea how little control they had left. I stepped away from the crowd and checked my phone again. New messages had come in. One confirmed that the investigation tied to the Whitmores was federal. Another listed dates, aliases, and locations that showed the same pattern repeating over years. Different cities, different names, same outcome, money taken, companies dissolved, people left behind with nothing. This was not a recent mistake. This was a long-running plan. I looked up and saw Sloane laughing near the stage, fully relaxed now. She believed the night was almost over and that everything she needed was already secured. Her parents stayed close to the exits, not to leave, but to monitor them. They were preparing for something, not celebrating. Garrett approached me again, this time without pretending everything was fine. He asked me directly if I knew something he did not. He said things felt wrong and that Sloane kept changing details about her past. I told him the truth without giving everything away. I said this engagement was built on false information and that he needed to stay calm and listen carefully to what happened next. He asked what I meant. I told him he would understand soon. He did not look relieved, he looked scared. The lights dimmed slightly as the DJ announced the upcoming toast. Guests began gathering closer to the stage. Phones came out. Smiles returned. This was the moment the Whitmores had been waiting for, the public confirmation they believed would protect them. Sloane's father stepped toward the microphone, straightening his jacket. His confidence was back, but I could see the tension in his jaw. He glanced toward the screens behind him, then toward Sloane, then toward my mother. He was checking his anchors. I moved quietly toward the side of the room and sent a single message to the manager. One word, ready. My phone buzzed again. This time it was Garrett. He said Sloane had asked him to sign something earlier and had brushed it off as paperwork for after the wedding. He said he had refused for now. That delay mattered more than he knew. The room grew quiet as the microphone came to life. Glasses were raised. People leaned forward, ready to witness what they thought was the beginning of a perfect future. I stayed where I was, watching every face, knowing that in moments the story everyone believed would no longer exist. The toast began the way all of them do, with practiced words and forced warmth. Sloane's father spoke about family, about trust, about building something lasting. People nodded along, satisfied by familiar language. No one questioned it. No one noticed how carefully he avoided specifics. I watched Sloane. Her smile was fixed, but her eyes kept moving. She looked toward her parents, then toward Garrett, then toward the doors. She was counting something. Time, maybe, or exits. My phone vibrated once. A confirmation, everything was ready. As her father continued speaking, the screens behind the stage flickered. At first, no one reacted. People assumed it was part of the presentation. Then the images changed. The engagement photos disappeared, replaced by a document filled with legal text and official stamps. The room shifted. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. Glasses lowered. Sloane's father paused. He turned to look at the screen, then back at the crowd. He laughed lightly and said there must be a technical issue. His voice shook when he tried to continue. Another document appeared, then another. Company names, court filings, dates, locations, names that did not match the ones they had introduced themselves with tonight. Whispers spread fast. Guests leaned closer to read. Phones came up again, this time recording. Sloane's mother reached for her husband's arm. He pulled away. Garrett turned slowly toward Sloane. He asked her what this was. She stared at the screen, her mouth opening without sound. For the first time all night, she did not have an answer ready. The images changed again. Older photos appeared, same faces, different names, different cities. The pattern was impossible to ignore now. Sloane stepped back, shaking her head, repeating that this was not real. Her voice was sharp, desperate. Her father tried to leave the stage, but security moved into place without making a scene. The exits were no longer options. The room was silent, except for the low hum of the screens cycling through proof. I stepped forward, not rushing, not hiding anymore. My boots echoed once on the floor. Heads turned. Recognition did not come immediately, only confusion. The microphone was still live. And before anyone could stop it, The truth had already taken control of the room. I reached the stage as Sloane's father tried to speak again. His words came out tangled, excuses stacked on top of each other, each one weaker than the last. He said the documents were fabricated. He said someone was trying to sabotage the family. No one responded. The room no longer belonged to him. Sloane turned toward me then. Recognition hit her slowly, like something painful clicking into place. She asked what I had done. Her voice was loud, sharp, meant to pull attention back to herself. I did not answer her. I did not need to. The screens changed again. This time it was not legal text. It was timelines. Names connected across states. Business registrations opening and closing in a pattern that left no space for doubt. The same three faces appeared again and again, years apart, under different identities. Someone near the front whispered that this looked like fraud. Another person said they remembered a similar story on the news years ago. The whispers stacked into noise. Garrett took a step away from Sloane. It was small, but it mattered. He asked her directly who she really was. She shook her head and said none of this mattered, that they loved each other, that this was an attack. She reached for him, but he did not take her hand. Her mother started crying loudly, saying they were being misunderstood. Her father tried to move toward the exit again. This time, security stopped him openly. The message was clear. The night was no longer under their control. I took the microphone without raising my voice. I stated one fact at a time. I said the names on the screen were not mistakes. I said the businesses tied to them were under active investigation. I said this engagement was part of a larger pattern meant to protect them from exposure. Sloane screamed that I was jealous. She said I had always wanted what Garrett had. She said I was ruining everything because I could not stand being invisible. Her words were desperate now, not sharp. I looked at her once. I told her she had made a mistake assuming invisibility meant weakness. At that moment, the ballroom doors opened. Several people entered, badges visible, expressions controlled. The sound of their footsteps cut through the room more effectively than any announcement. Everything stopped. The engagement was over. The lie was finished. And whatever came next was no longer in anyone's hands but theirs. The people who entered did not rush. They did not raise their voices. They moved with certainty, like they had done this many times before. One of them spoke to Sloane's father first, using a name no one in the room recognized. That alone told everyone everything they needed to know. Sloane turned in a slow circle, looking at faces that had admired her an hour earlier. No one stepped forward. No one defended her. The room had shifted, and she was standing alone in it. Garrett stayed where he was, frozen. An officer asked him to step aside. He did without protest. Sloane tried to follow him, insisting this was a misunderstanding, that she could explain everything. She reached for his arm again. He pulled away. Her mother started shouting that this was illegal, that they had lawyers, that none of this could happen here. No one responded to her either. One by one, the officers separated them, calm and efficient. I stepped back into the crowd. I did not need the microphone anymore. The truth no longer needed help speaking. Sloane's father was informed of the charges quietly. The words wire fraud and conspiracy traveled faster than his voice. Guests shifted, some stepping back, others leaning in, unable to look away. Phones stayed raised. This moment would not stay in this room. Sloane finally looked directly at me, not with arrogance this time, but fear. She asked how long I had known. She asked why I had not said anything sooner. I told her nothing. She did not deserve answers. She had spent too long assuming silence meant ignorance. Security guided them toward the exit. Sloane resisted at first, then stopped when she realized no one was helping her. As she was led away, she shouted that this place meant nothing, that none of it mattered. Her voice cracked before she finished the sentence. The doors closed behind them. No one spoke for several seconds. Music did not return. Glasses stayed untouched. The celebration had collapsed into something heavy and unfamiliar. Garrett finally turned to look at me. His face held shock, confusion, and something else I could not name yet. He asked quietly if it was true, not about them, about me. I did not answer right away. This night was not finished. The lie had fallen, but the damage had only just begun. The room stayed frozen even after they were gone. People did not know where to look anymore. Some avoided Garrett. Others watched me like they were trying to place a name to a face they had ignored all night. Garrett walked closer and lowered his voice. He asked me again if it was true. He asked how long I had known and why I had let things reach this point. I told him I did not plan the engagement, and I did not choose who he trusted. I told him I only acted when it became clear he was being used. He did not argue. That silence told me he finally understood how close he had come to disaster. My mother approached next. She looked shaken, not angry. She asked what just happened, as if the truth might sound different out loud. I told her Sloane's family had targeted them because they believed Garrett had money. I watched the realization settle slowly. She whispered that Garrett did not have that kind of money. I said I knew. She asked who had been paying the mortgage for years. She asked who covered the hospital bills. I did not answer her immediately. I let the question hang between us, heavy and unavoidable. Around us, guests started leaving in small groups. No one said goodbye. No one congratulated anyone. The night had turned into something people wanted to forget quickly. My phone buzzed again. A message confirmed that the investigation would continue and that more arrests were likely. This was not ending tonight. It was only beginning. Garrett rubbed his face and asked why Sloane wanted him to sign papers earlier. He asked what they would have done if he had. I told him the truth then. I said they would have tied him to their mess legally. I said his name would have been pulled into something that could not be undone. He went quiet. Then he nodded once, like a man accepting how close he came to losing everything without realizing it. My mother's voice broke when she finally asked if it had really been me helping them all this time. I looked at her and said yes. I said it had always been me. She covered her mouth with her hand, staring at the floor. She did not apologize, not yet, but the ground under her beliefs had already cracked. The engagement was over. The truth was out. And now the most dangerous part began because there were no lies left to hide behind. The room emptied faster after that. People left without asking questions, without saying goodnight, carrying the story with them. What stayed behind was heavier than noise. It was the kind of silence that forces people to face things they avoided for years. Garrett sat down, staring at nothing. He asked what would happen next. I told him the truth would keep moving whether any of us wanted it to or not. Investigations did not stop at one night. They expanded. Names were added. Records were pulled. There was no rewinding this. He asked if his name would be dragged into it. I told him no, not unless he had signed something or moved money for them. He exhaled slowly, like someone realizing how close they came to falling off a ledge. My mother stood a few steps away, listening without interrupting. When she finally spoke, she asked why I never told her. I asked her when she had ever asked. The question landed harder than any accusation. She had no answer. She tried to explain herself. She said she assumed Garrett was doing well. She said she never imagined I could carry that kind of responsibility. I did not argue. I had learned a long time ago that denial sounds like explanation to the person using it. Garrett stood up and walked toward the bar, then stopped. He turned back and asked me something quietly. He asked if Sloane ever knew the truth about me. I told him no. I told him she believed exactly what she wanted to believe. That seemed to hurt him more than anything else. He nodded once and said he needed air. As he walked away, a staff member approached and told me the officers wanted a statement later. I said I would give it. There was nothing to hide. My phone buzzed again. This time it was a message from an unknown number. It was short. It said I had ruined everything and that this was not over. I deleted it without responding. Threats meant nothing once the truth was public. I looked around the ballroom one last time. Decorations meant for celebration now looked irrelevant. The night had served its real purpose already. The lie had collapsed. The protection was gone. And whatever fallout came next would no longer be aimed at the wrong person. The night did not end when the room emptied. That was only the surface closing. What mattered was what followed once people stopped pretending everything was normal. I stepped into a quiet office near the service corridor to give my statement. The questions were direct. Names, dates, what I heard, what I knew when I knew it. I answered without hesitation. The officers were calm but focused. They were not surprised by what I told them. That worried me more than anything else. It meant this case was larger than tonight. When I returned, Garrett was waiting. He said Sloan had tried calling him repeatedly from an unknown number. He had not answered. He asked if he should block it. I told him to keep the messages. Everything mattered now. My mother sat nearby, holding her phone like it might explain something to her if she stared long enough. She asked what would happen to the necklace. I told her it had never belonged where she placed it. She nodded, not arguing, finally understanding that some decisions cannot be undone with excuses. A staff member approached and informed me that Sloane's parents had asked to speak to me before being taken away. I declined. There was nothing left to discuss. Whatever they had planned, it no longer included us. Garrett asked me why I stayed silent for so long. I told him the truth. Silence had protected me once. Tonight, it protected him. He looked at me for a long moment and said he had never realized how much he took for granted. I did not respond. Recognition did not erase damage, but it changed what came next. My phone buzzed again, another unknown number. This time the message was different. It said I had exposed the wrong people and that I would regret it. I showed it to one of the officers without comment. He took a photo and told me they would handle it. Outside, sirens faded into the distance. The building settled back into stillness. The engagement that was meant to secure a future had done the opposite. It had torn open a past no one wanted examined. I stood there knowing one thing clearly now. The people who thought they had chosen an easy target had made a final mistake. And the consequences were no longer negotiable. By morning, the story was already moving beyond the room where it began. Messages came in from numbers I did not recognize. Some were cautious. Some were curious. Others were sharp, asking questions no one had bothered to ask before tonight. Garrett stayed at the hotel instead of going home. He said he did not want to face explanations yet. He asked me what would happen when people realized the money they thought came from him never did. I told him the truth would correct itself. Lies always collapse once attention turns toward them. My mother called early. Her voice sounded smaller. She asked if we could talk later, not now. I said we could, that was all. The officers returned before noon. They told me Sloane's parents had been formally charged and that more evidence had surfaced overnight. The case was expanding faster than expected. The name Sloane Whitmore was already being replaced in documents by another one. Not her first, and likely not her last. Garrett read one of the reports over my shoulder. He recognized details Sloane had shared about her childhood, stories he once defended when they did not add up. He stopped reading halfway through and handed the phone back. He said he felt foolish. I told him manipulation only works when it is designed carefully. That did not make it his fault. Later, a lawyer contacted us on Garrett's behalf. He confirmed that the unsigned document Sloane had pushed him to review would have linked him financially to her parents' businesses. One signature would have changed everything. Garrett sat quietly after that, understanding what had almost happened. My phone buzzed again. This time it was a familiar number. Sloane, I did not answer. She left a message anyway. Her voice moved between anger and pleading. She said I had destroyed her life. She said none of this would have happened if I had stayed in my place. I deleted the message without responding. That afternoon, the necklace was returned to me by hotel security. It had been recovered from the floor where Sloane dropped it. I did not put it on. I placed it in my bag and closed it carefully. Garrett noticed. He said it was always meant to be mine. I told him I knew. The night had ended, but its impact was spreading outward, touching every lie that had been protected by silence. And the more it spread, the clearer it became that this story was no longer just about exposure. It was about what came after the truth, when no one could hide anymore. The pressure did not fade with daylight. It intensified. People who had smiled the night before now wanted distance. Others wanted explanations they had no right to demand. The story was no longer private, and it was no longer controlled. Garrett received a call from his workplace before noon. Not an accusation, but a warning. They had seen his name mentioned online in connection with the engagement and wanted clarification. He explained what he could without defending anyone. When the call ended, He looked shaken. He finally understood how fast reputations fall when lies attach themselves. Another call came in, this one from a bank Garrett had never worked with. Someone had attempted to verify accounts under his name overnight. The attempt failed, but the intent was clear. Even after exposure, someone was still trying to move pieces. That was when the officer returned and confirmed what we suspected. Sloan had not acted alone. There were others connected to the scheme, people whose names had not surfaced yet. The engagement was only one piece of a much larger operation, and it had been designed to move money quickly once legal ties were formed. Garrett sat back and closed his eyes. He said if he had signed those papers, he would already be trapped. I said nothing. He did not need confirmation. My mother arrived later that day. She did not speak at first. She handed me a small box without meeting my eyes. Inside was the necklace. She said she had made a mistake. She did not say more. The silence carried everything she could not admit yet. A message came through my phone while she was still standing there. It was from an unknown number again. This one was different. It was calm. It said we could have handled things quietly and that making it public had consequences. I showed it to the officer without reacting. He nodded once and took note. That was when it became clear this was not over for them. And it was not over for us either. Because exposure does not end danger, it changes its shape. The next move came without warning. By evening, legal notices started arriving. Not charges but pressure, requests for statements, attempts to reopen old contracts. Someone was testing limits, looking for weak points to push through. Garrett received another call, this one from a number he did not recognize. The voice on the other end did not threaten him. It spoke calmly, almost kindly. It suggested that things had gone too far and that silence could still be arranged if everyone behaved sensibly. Garrett ended the call without replying and showed me the number. It was already disconnected. The officers confirmed what that meant. The network behind Sloan's family was trying to contain damage. They were seeing who might panic, who might talk, who might accept a deal. That made us useful targets. Security at the hotel was increased quietly. No announcements, no visible tension. From the outside, everything looked normal. That was the point. My mother stayed silent most of the night. When she finally spoke, she asked what would have happened if I had not been there. I told her Garrett would have signed something eventually. She did not argue, she already knew. Garrett asked me why they underestimated me. I told him they did not underestimate me specifically. They underestimated anyone who stayed quiet. He nodded slowly, absorbing that. Later, an officer informed us that one of the Whitmore aliases had been flagged in another state only hours after the arrest. Someone had tried to move assets quickly and failed. That attempt alone confirmed how deep this ran. Garrett looked at me and said the engagement felt like it had been a test he was meant to fail. I told him it was. That was the truth. Another message came in just before midnight. No threats this time, just one line. It said some people do not forgive exposure. I deleted it and handed the phone to the officer standing nearby. He told me that message was confirmation enough. The danger had not passed, it had only changed direction. And now it was watching us. The days that followed felt tighter, like the walls had moved closer without anyone touching them. Nothing happened loudly. That was what made it worse. Silence replaced chaos, and silence left space for calculation. Garrett stopped answering unknown calls. Messages still came through, shorter now, less emotional, more controlled. Someone wanted him unsettled but not frightened enough to run. That balance told us they were watching reactions closely. The officers confirmed that Sloan had refused to cooperate. She claimed everything had been manipulated and insisted she was a victim. At the same time, financial activity tied to her old aliases slowed suddenly, then stopped. It meant someone had cut her loose. My mother finally asked to speak to me alone. She said she had been replaying the night again and again, trying to find the moment she should have noticed something was wrong. I told her that moment did not matter anymore. What mattered was what she did next. She nodded, understanding that this was not forgiveness or resolution. It was acknowledgement. Garrett admitted he had defended Sloan to people even when details did not line up. He said he thought doubt meant disloyalty. I told him doubt is usually the first warning. He did not argue. That night, hotel security reported someone had tried to access restricted records using an old contractor login. The attempt failed, but the timing was not accidental. The message was quiet and deliberate. Someone wanted to know how much we knew and how prepared we were. The officer assigned to us said this was common near the end of a long scheme. When exposure becomes unavoidable, pressure replaces charm, mistakes increase. People turn on each other. Garrett asked if he was still in danger. The officer said danger depends on usefulness. As long as Garrett stayed silent and unreachable, the risk stayed low. Another message arrived before dawn. This one had no words, just a location pin from a city far away. I handed it over without reacting. The officer stared at the screen longer than usual, then told me that was not intimidation. It was a signal. Someone else wanted to talk. The location meant nothing to me, but it meant something to the officers. They told me it was connected to a shell company that had been shut down years ago and reopened under a different name. Someone was offering information, but only if it was handled carefully. Garrett wanted to know if meeting was necessary. The officer said no one would go alone. He said this kind of move usually came from someone trying to trade safety for distance. It meant the pressure inside the network was breaking. The meeting did not happen that night. Instead, information started arriving in pieces. Account numbers, email chains, copies of agreements that never reached public records. Each one confirmed the same thing. The engagement had been rushed because time had run out. My family was not the first target, just the last convenient one. Sloane finally contacted Garrett again. This time, there was no anger. Her message was short and controlled. She said she had not known how deep it went when she agreed to everything. She said she had been promised protection. She said none of that existed anymore. Garrett showed me the message and asked what he should do. I told him nothing. Silence was no longer weakness. It was leverage. That evening, an officer confirmed another arrest connected to the network. Someone had talked. Someone always did when the structure collapsed. The case was accelerating now, feeding on itself. My mother listened quietly as the officer explained what would likely follow. Court dates, statements, long stretches of waiting. She asked if our name would be cleared publicly. He said eventually, yes. But not quickly. Truth moves slower than damage. Later that night, Garrett admitted something he had never said before. He said he had always assumed I would be fine no matter what happened to me. He said he never considered that I was carrying weight meant for more than one person. He did not apologize again. He did not need to. The realization was enough. Outside, the city stayed unaware. Inside, the final pieces were falling into place. The story was no longer about exposure. It was about who would survive what followed. The next morning brought confirmation that the network was collapsing faster than expected. More accounts were frozen. More names surfaced. The pattern that had stayed hidden for years was now fully exposed, and there was no way to seal it again. Garrett received an official notice clearing him of any involvement. It was brief, factual, and final. He read it twice, then set the phone down without speaking. Relief came later, quietly, after the tension released its grip. Sloane was charged under her real name. The officers told us she had tried to negotiate, offering partial information in exchange for protection. It did not work. Others had already given more and earlier. She was no longer valuable. Another message arrived that afternoon. This one was different from the rest. It was an apology, not from Sloane, but from someone deeper in the operation. It said targeting the wrong family had accelerated everything. It said exposure had destroyed years of planning. There was no threat attached, just a statement of loss. The officer told me that message meant the danger had peaked. When people admit mistakes, they stop pushing forward. They focus on surviving what remains. My mother asked if this would ever truly end. The officer said it would end legally long before it ended emotionally. That was normal. She nodded, accepting that some consequences do not close neatly. Garrett asked what would happen to Sloane. The answer was simple. Court, evidence. Time, nothing dramatic, no speeches, just process. He did not ask again. That evening, the hotel returned to its normal rhythm. Guests came and went without knowing what had unfolded their days earlier. The same floors, the same walls, holding a story no one would guess. Garrett stood beside me near the entrance and said he finally understood why I stayed quiet all those years. He said silence had never meant absence. It had meant control. I did not correct him. He had reached that conclusion on his own. As night settled, the last alert came through. The investigation was officially closed to new evidence. What remained was prosecution. The story had reached its final turn. All that was left was to see who stood where when it was over. The case closed without ceremony. No announcements, no victory statements, just files sealed, charges filed, and names that would not return to the surface again. The noise faded the same way it had begun, quietly. Sloane was transferred out of state within weeks. Her real name appeared in court records beside numbers that erased whatever future she had planned. She never contacted us again. Whatever she believed would save her did not exist. Garrett moved out of the place he shared with her. He did not take much with him. What mattered had never belonged to that apartment anyway. He stopped explaining himself to people. When questions came, he answered only what was required. The rest he left untouched. My mother changed without announcing it. She stopped telling stories that were not hers to tell. She stopped filling silence with assumptions. When she spoke to me now, she listened first. That shift mattered more than apologies. The hotel returned fully to routine. Meetings, bookings, contracts, decisions made without hesitation. The night that had exposed everything was no longer visible in the walls, but it stayed in memory like a line you do not cross again. One evening, Garrett asked if I ever planned to tell them the truth about who I was before that night. I told him no. He nodded, understanding that timing had never been accidental. A final report arrived weeks later, confirming that the engagement had been identified as a strategic attempt to shield assets and identities. The conclusion was brief. Target miscalculated. Exposure accelerated collapse. I closed the file and locked it away. There was no celebration, no closure speech. Just the knowledge that a lie built carefully over years had failed in one evening because it depended on the wrong person staying silent. And I never intended to stay silent forever. You have reached the end of the text.